Garland hurtled. He couldn't tell if he was falling or flying. His head told him that both were happening at once. The speed at which he was traveling was unbelievable. He could feel the air whipping across his skin, burning and scouring it as it went. Luminous silver clouds above, below, and to all sides, splashes of color, strange rainbow whirlpools zipped past him. Had his training been a little more complete, had he learned to slow his mind enough, he could have appreciated the strange vistas of the astral plane whirling past him at impossible speeds. He might have noticed the great stone colossus off to his left, a petrified goddess of inestimable age, or the great red dragon swirling around in her orbit, or the glittering city built on the small of her vast back. He might have noticed the terrible kraken-like creature drifting pale against the clouds, although that might have broken his mind. But the journey only lasted seconds. Then there was a swirl of color, and then a splash, cold water all around him. Or was it water? He noticed that his skin was tingling. As he got his bearings, he looked at the halberd clutched in his white-knuckled hand, and saw that the head of the weapon was dissolving. In a panic, he closed his eyes and began swimming in the direction he thought was upward. He could feel his clothes coming undone, pulling him down, and then he managed to grab into a surface and pull himself up with a gasp. He was alive, but now he had to face the all-important question. Where was he? Reload your three-bladed sword. Get comfortable in your chainmail bikini or your studded leather kirtle. Fire up the wizard van. It's about to get weird. Welcome to Swords Against Madness, an experimental fusion of solo tabletop role-playing game and psychedelic weird fantasy fiction. I'm playing Swords and Wizardry, a recreation of the original 1974 through 1978 rules of Dungeons & Dragons, combined with solo gaming tools like the Mythic Game Master emulator. I play the game, and then I turn it into a weird, pulpy story for your enjoyment. There are no rerolls or special rules to protect the characters. Just the dice and a fair-minded GM. And while I'm looking to create something like the weird, twisted science fiction and fantasy of the 1970s, I'm going to keep it PG, or at least what passed for PG when I was a kid in the 80s. If you didn't see it in Goonies, Gremlins, or Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, you won't hear about it here. But that's enough talk. It's time to get weird. The companions walked slowly up the canyon, mindful for more giant beetles or other threats. I promise you, Edryk said, there are no other traps in the canyon, although once we get inside there will be illusions, tricks, living guardians, spells, and traps to prevent us from getting further. We really shouldn't be here without help. The Order of the Stars, if you could just wait a little bit, they would be happy to see you through here. But we haven't any of the keys. We don't know where the traps are hidden. When I was an initiate, they brought me here blindfolded. They told me that my eyes would deceive me, nor did they let me know how to operate the machine at the center of the structure that allows us to get deeper in.
I'm afraid I don't have time to wait. I have taken a small but potentially deadly dose of radiation. For every day I wait, tumors will form. Parts of my body will burn from the inside. I can't afford to sit around, wait for some mystics to tell me it's time to go. Nala's medicine is pulling some of it out of my body, but there's only so far it can go. Waiting for initiations and purification rituals will kill me. Besides, I didn't exactly come with the happiest of news, did I?
I understand. Really, I do. I know that things are urgent. And I know the Order hasn't exactly given you a warm welcome. But if you could just wait a day or two, I should be able to get them to see reason.
We're here now, Edryk. Let's just get it over with.
Rayya, surely someone must have told you the stories. Rayya winced, nursing the wound on her thigh from the beetle's mandible.
Yeah, I have. And I also know that half of them are lies to keep people from coming up here in the first place. Miria needs this, and I know what she's capable of. I think we've got this.
Nala, surely you don't want to see Miria just charge into danger. Enough. We're here. The Fane of the All-Knowing was a hexagonal aperture in the side of the cliff, surrounded by paintings, sigils, and diagrams of the stars. Shimmering sigils done in electrum Miria recognized as universal navigation markers and computer interface icons. Leave it to the Trassi Syndicate to cleverly weave intelligence into the religions they faked. Nala lit a beautiful nautical lantern and held it high over her head as they proceeded down the tunnel, but it became clear after a moment that they wouldn't need extra light sources. At intervals of about 15 feet, there were pyramids of blue crystal hanging upside down from the ceiling, bound in electrum wire. They cast a pale blue glow over everything. The walls had been smoothed and polished to a sheen that reflected the light, making it bright enough that one could even read in this tunnel. In places there were markings, some alchemical formula, some mystical sigils. Miria stopped at one panel in particular to examine it. It had been divided into hexagons, and in some of them were set 1 or 2 round stones, and graven markings underneath. Some of the tiles were bordered in copper or brass. She traced her finger until she found a particular stone and examined it carefully.
What do these markings mean? X78687775-4. Red. This is us right here, and this is a map of the local star sector. Every stone represents a world where you can find people of some kind or another. Really? Where's your home world?
Miria smiled.
I'm afraid this is only a sector map. It covers about 88 parsecs. If the map continued out, my home would be right there next to the entrance. To be honest, I've tried to get as far away from it as possible, and I'm not particularly keen on going back.
Just how big is the civilization you're from?
We cover a few hundred sectors, probably 3,000 or 4,000 worlds. There is a lot to see out there. I'm sorry that the scumbags who found yours were the Trassi.
I thought you were in a hurry.
You're right. Let's keep moving.
Knowing that there might be traps anywhere, the companions moved slowly, carefully, taking in what information they could off the walls, although little of it made sense to anyone except perhaps Edryk and Miria. Finally they came to a junction. To the right of them the hallway went on for a few more crystals before reaching a solid metal door. 2 others sat on the wall opposite them side by side. To the left, there was a shallow alcove with a strange and grisly sight. The hands, face, chest, and shoulders of a man emerged from the wall, as if he had been fused into it.
Isn't that High Trader Bress?
Rayya stepped up to the strange body half in and half out of the stone. She tried to see how he fitted to the wall, but found that he appeared to be entirely fused, no seams, no holes he might have come from. And then suddenly his eyes flew open. The man gasped, then screamed a soul-rending scream.
You must leave! You shouldn't be here! You're not worthy! I wasn't worthy either! And now look at me! Look at what they did to me!
Scrambling back in horror, Rayya put too much weight on her wounded leg and fell over. Nala barely caught her and the 2 of them staggered against the wall before Edryk walked up to the apparition and slid his hand straight through the face. The colors of the figure distorted, and then he vanished, leaving only a smooth wall behind. An illusion to frighten intruders. Nothing in here is going to be what it appears. We must be extremely careful. Rayya nodded, then looked to Miria.
I'm going to assume this thing's a bit of a maze as well. They always are. We'll stick to going left whenever we can. That way if we get lost, we can always turn right every time to get out of here.
Rayya nodded and walked over to the door on the left-hand side of the two opposite them. She tried the door and found it jammed. Then, with a growl and steadying herself, she threw her shoulder hard against the door and bashed it open.
No sense in being subtle after that racket.
For this adventure, I decided I wanted to do an old-fashioned dungeon crawl. Obviously, too much time spent in a dungeon would be a little boring, and so I made sure that if I was going to go into a dungeon, I was going to have a clear and meaningful goal. When I'm playing a solo game, there are really 4 ways I can generate a dungeon. One of my favorites, and the one I use when I'm DMing Swords Against Wizardry on Thursday nights, is to play a game of 4 Against Darkness to generate a map. It's a fun and inexpensive solo role-playing game that generates a dungeon as you crawl it. Another method I really enjoy involves another solo podcaster like myself. John Cohen of Tale of the Manticore wrote a great little game called One Shot in the Dark that uses a deck of cards to generate a dungeon as you play through it. It's pretty easy to change what the monsters mean on the cards by using the AD&D random encounter table or Swords and Wizardry one, and playing out things like combats and trap encounters using your game of choice rather than the built-in rules for One Shot in the Dark. A few times I've created a huge list of possible encounters that fit the theme of the dungeon, and use clocks in the style of Blades in the Dark to see how much progress I'm making in the dungeon, turn by turn. And when I roll that there's an encounter or I reach a major node where I have to challenge myself to fill in a slot on the clock, I use one of the random encounters, usually rolled off of a D66 table. But for this dungeon, I decided to go truly old school and use Drow's AD&D random dungeon generator on donjon.bin.sh. If you're not familiar with the website, it's one of the most amazing resources you can have. It has random generators for everything from maps to campaign worlds to dungeons to NPCs, and it has tools for multiple role-playing games including Cyberpunk, Microlight D20, AD&D, Pathfinder, and Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, among others. The AD&D random dungeon generator creates a pretty solid map using the random generation tools from the AD&D DMG, and then stocks it with appropriate random tables based on a theme you select. It also adds in things like illusions, traps, interesting bits of graffiti, and random room details. You can have a keyless map generated for handing to players, and you can output the whole thing, monsters and details and all, to a PDF, which is exactly what I did for this dungeon. Currently, this podcast is lagging about 4 months behind when I've actually played. And that means that I've had lots of time to make some seriously foolish mistakes. And in this case, one of them was accidentally deleting the PDF that contained this dungeon. So any map you see in the show notes is a reconstruction based on what I can remember. Thankfully, I take very detailed notes, and so I haven't lost any of the action when I lost the map. I will link to an example of my own random solo creation, as well as One Shot in the Dark, 4 Against Darkness, and Donjon in the show notes.
My name's Tessa. Tessa Whitlock. Really, I'm fine.
You're a terrible liar. You know that, right?
You are a threat. You aren't one of us, and you know it.
I don't remember anything.
It was you! It was all your fault!
I'm not alone.
Look, can you just tell me what the hell is going on?
There's something wrong here. You hear me? I'm leaving. I'm not playing this game anymore.
You should tell them.
Tessa, you need to get out of there.
I'm done. No.
I don't even know myself, Tessa.
No.
Look after her.
All I know is that I am here.
Run. I've got you.
Help! Help us, please, Anisha!
Tess.
Sole Operator will return January 13th, 2025, wherever you listen to podcasts.
The room beyond the door was huge and echoed. Its ceiling was unevenly covered with the same glowing pyramids that lit the hallways behind them. At the center of the room was a small dais piled high with coins that seemed strangely off-colored in the blue light. As they took the first few paces into the room, they turned and looked behind them to see that both doors had led into the same chamber, but some kind of complex mechanism was attached to the door jamb of the right-hand door. Miria quietly thanked the void they had picked the left-hand door. They were still trying to disentangle exactly what the mechanism would have done, when suddenly Garland shouted, "Eyes up, idiots!" and grabbed hold of Edryk. A moment later there was an almighty crash as one of the pyramids came falling down from the ceiling, divoting the stone floor. As they turned and stared at the object resting where Edryk had been a moment earlier, it wobbled, fell on its side, and then a number of chitinous legs unfolded from the bottom of the pyramid and pulled it to a righted state. A creature like a horrible, fleshy hermit crab peered from underneath the strange crystalline shell. Rayya pulled out her blade and slashed at it hard as she could, knocking it off balance, but leaving only the smallest of chips in the creature's carapace. It bought Nala just enough time, however, to hook her sickle underneath the creature's legs and sweep it upside down to reveal a squirming underbelly. She brought the sickle high and then down through the fleshy middle of the creature's undersides. There was a spray of cobalt blue blood. The creature squirmed for a moment, and then was still. Edryk knelt down, examining the creature. He tipped it up and touched the peak of the pyramid, finding it narrow and razor sharp. "You just saved my life. I didn't want to have to lug your body out of here. What the hell is it?" "Look, now that it's come off the ceiling, the pyramids all seem to be much more evenly spaced. Keep an eye out for ones that are out of place and not glowing as brightly. That's how we'll spot the things." "You expect there to be more of them?" "I'm afraid so, although I couldn't say how many. I know that some kind of incense is used to pacify them, but I don't have any and wouldn't know how to make it." Rayya unslung her energy rifle.
I'll be the one to keep an eye on the ceiling.
Slowly they fanned out to examine the rest of the room. The altar at the center had a mix of copper coins, and other coins that took a moment to recognize as platinum. Those valuable coins Miria scooped up and tucked into her own pouch, giving Edryk a look that dared him to complain. The chamber had a door on the far left wall, the opposite wall, and the wall on the far right. Keeping to the rule of left, the group carefully crossed the room and headed down the leftmost passage. It went for a few paces, then turned sharply to a dead end. Perplexed, they spent some time tapping on walls and looking for hidden panels and levers on the various artwork on the walls, but found nothing of value, and so they returned to the room, and then, following their same rule of left, headed to the door on the south. The door itself was tall, wide, made of preserved wood covered in an ornate brass leaf depicting a nighttime scene. They inspected it carefully for anything like springs or wires connected to the door before pulling it open, only to find that on the other side was a thick and heavy wooden portcullis, also bound in brass, with a winch and crank mechanism clearly visible on the far side of the portcullis. "Well, we're getting nowhere fast." "Hold on, I have an idea." Edryk fiddled around in his backpack for a moment, and pulled out a number of sections that screwed together into a fairly lengthy wooden pole. Then he pulled out a length of silken rope, and worked it around several of the bars, before tying it around the pole, and then he began to twist, slowly and methodically. After a moment he signaled the others to help, and slowly they began turning the pole end over end with 5 of their strength. After a few moments there was a groan, and several of the bars snapped under the pressure of the twisting silk. From there they were able to pull away the pieces enough to squat and one by one go through a hole in the middle of the portcullis. Beyond it they found another octagonal room, nearly identical to the one that they had just left, except it was absent any dais. Instead, the floor had another collection of massive star charts and maps, a larger, more ornate copy of the one that Miria had examined before. There was another door on the right, again made of heavy oak, and again covered in ornate bronze leaf. but this one proved stubborn. Garland broke a lockpick attempting to get it open, and no matter how hard Rayya attempted to bash her shoulder against it, the door wouldn't budge. Frustrated, they returned to the previous room and headed for the final door.
I'm sorry this is going really slow, but I can't afford to spend forever preparing. Surely one of these doors will give up to us.
We just have to be a little more decisive with them. Garland took a couple of steps back, then rushed forward at the door, swirling into a reverse kick with incredible grace. There was a crunch as the door flew open, and at the same time a strange hissing noise as a sigil planted in the ceiling above the door suddenly flared to life, and Garland disappeared in a swirl of purple and silver mist. Garland coughed and spluttered for a few moments before pulling himself up to a sitting position. The glowing crystal pyramids on the ceiling told him that he was in the same dungeon, but where he was he couldn't say. The vast pool in the middle of the chamber hadn't seemed to have done him any harm. But his belt and shoe buckles, his halberd, his dagger, the coins in his pocket, anything metal he had possessed had melted away in there. He allowed himself a moment to panic. But fear wasn't allowed in his order, and he grabbed the feeling and pushed it aside after a moment. He tied off his trousers so that they wouldn't fall down, and then moved to one of the two doors in the chamber. He put his ear against it and listened for a while. He swore he could hear the distant echoes of someone's voice. That would be the way to go. He took a moment to scan the door for any spring mechanism that might have triggered the same trap as the one they had seen from behind. And he checked the ceiling for glyphs. All clear in both cases. Not that I need those idiots. I could beat them to the all-knowing no problem, but, well. Having caught himself in a moment's self-deception, he spat on the floor, grabbed hold of the door, and yanked it open. There was a brief rumble, a shudder. Garland was fast. He almost managed to leap free, but not quite, as a trapdoor opened beneath his feet, sending him plummeting 20 feet onto a number of 5-foot-high rusty iron spikes. There was a moment's shock, and then he knew no more. When I rolled up Garland, I wasn't sure what kind of character I wanted. His low charisma made it easy to want to make him slightly unlikable or have an odd personality. And then as I played him, he died so very quickly. And he did so alone. Aside from a hear noise check to tell him what direction to go, he hadn't succeeded a single roll since he was generated. And I can't say as though I thought I would miss him once he was gone. With all those elements in place, I decided I wanted to make him a representation of a character every DM has had to put up with once or twice. The edgelord. The lone wolf. The character who thinks he's better than everyone else, and who is mechanically built to be able to do everyone's job. It made it kind of cathartic when he finally fell down that pit. But now the party is completely devoid again of thief skills. Not to mention a character who had every potential of being a deadly warrior. Here's hoping they won't miss him in the end. The rest of the party stood in shocked silence for a moment at Garland's disappearance. Miria stood under the glyph, looking up, examining it carefully.
A teleportation trap of some kind. I'm pretty sure it's inert now. It takes a lot of magic to power something like this. Well, where is he? There's no way to tell. He could be on the moon for all I know. But most likely he's somewhere on the island, possibly still in the Fane here.
In all likelihood, he was sent somewhere where he wouldn't be able to get out, at least not safely. A holding place so the Order could interrogate him later.
Then we'll just have to see if we can find him as we explore. Did you hear something?
No. What did you think you heard?
Nothing, never mind. Let's get a move on.
Swords Against Madness was written, directed, played, and GM'd by Brian C. Rideout. Editing and production was done by Stormhead Productions, which is also Brian Rideout. I have generated the music in this series using the Suno AI. For show notes and more information, visit swordsvmadness.stormheadproductions.ca. You can reach me on X at swordsvmadness, and you can email me at swordsvmadness@stormheadproductions.ca. And until next time, roll high, play hard, and think weird.